I give a fuck? Why do I give a fuck? Why do I try so hard? Why do I care so much?
Welcome to Why Do I Give a Fuck? A cross-cultural conversation between myself, Deanne Tate,
and Johanna Thompson. In these times of great struggle and possible shift, we ask ourselves,
why do we give a fuck about any of it? How does the lens we see the world through impact what we see?
And what do we do about it? How impactful for those who watch this speech and are a part of this demographic that was directly being addressed?
Mm-hmm.
How do we speak into that? How do we build relationships? How do we help people to kind of get into a place where they're recognizing the level of harm and violence in that? Like, what is the conversation to be had amongst white women in that age demographic who watched that and felt some type of motivation or lack thereof? Also, how do we talk to our young people who are Gen Z and address these like issues? The only thing that I could do was, and you're saying you didn't talk to your white peers and whatnot. I called all of my folks and was like, did you this like what am I losing my mind? And I called everyone, and some people had not even watched it or paid attention because it was Senator Britt who was giving it. Like they weren't even thinking about paying attention to it, which is also another layer of interest.
That's how we move through space, white women.
Yeah,
We get to go, under the radar, right?
under the radar because of the
Yeah,
status quo.
yeah,
It's a real
absolutely.
interesting
Absolutely.
dynamic. But asking all my folks, and then when folks listened to it, they was like, "Yo, this is typical." It is. It wasn't like a shock. It was typical, and it was just like, and how many people who claim allies, who claim, accomplice, who stand on the front lines, also have this kind of underbelly belief that they should be sitting in a different level of privilege and priority and comfort and what was promised as the American dream. And so they would actually be motivated to act in their favor. And I recognize what that could look like because power does feel good if we're just going to talk about it and, being honest.
I have learned in my awakening, and then, I will be doing this the rest of my life, that I have to be so hyper intentional about unpacking like each, I'm sitting here thinking about how the fact that I watched the rebuttal intentionally, and then you said you really wanted to have a pointed conversation about it. And I haven't spoken to any other white women about it, not because it just hasn't occurred to me that this is a charge that I need to make. I mean, I'm in spaces right now with other white women organizing around liberation for everyone, specifically Palestine. And we're talking a lot about that kind of stuff. And there's despair and anger and frustration and lack of hope around what this election could do. And I don't find myself in circles too much anymore where women might be on the fence or might vote for something or might listen to Katie Britt and think that she's speaking to them. But that doesn't mean I don't still need to have these dialogues, and she's a perfect example of the narrative and the safety with which white women move and live and exist and don't have to dial in, don't have to have the dialogues, don't have to stand up and say, this is, I'm calling BS on this. I mean, 52% of white women voted for Trump in 2016. And after everything that happened over those 4 years, 53% of us voted for him in 2020. So clearly we either, didn't learn our lesson, or what he was saying actually we wanted more of, and in higher numbers than what we did in 2016, when all we really had at that point was the grab them by the P word tape. That was the only thing not the only thing, but that was the biggest thing that spoke necessarily to women about. And then Roe v. Wade, was on the chopping block, and we still showed up to vote for him. So
what is the psychology of that? I don't understand.
I don't understand it.
I don't understand.
I don't understand it.
Voting against yourself with like kind of this made up narrative of what should be, but it does not it does not serve any purpose but actually elevating the position of white maleness. It does serve the purpose of creating protections larger protections, and again, white women on a pedestal. So
But we are
maybe that is
sacrificing
fitting
ourselves, but we are
to have that
sacrificing
position.
ourselves and our rights
Hmm.
for, you know,
For protection and to be on a pedestal. What's more important?
yeah. I mean, there's no, I don't, yeah. I mean, we're having these dialogues a lot around whiteness's disconnect from what's happening to women and children and men every day in Palestine and in Sudan and in Congo, and the devoid of awareness and understanding and willingness to stand up and say this isn't right when it's happening on live stream. We're watching it every day, and yet whiteness continues to be silent. And I'm recognizing that it's not just white people that are being silent about it, but that's my lane, so I'm gonna stay in it. We are the exasperation and frustration over people in my life that profess to love everyone and yet will not say a word about the US paying for this ongoing genocide and starvation of an entire population of people just for a land grab. They would rather lose relationships and lose people that are close to them than look at what they're not looking at and say, maybe I should be paying attention. Maybe I should be saying something. They will write you off. I've been written off. I have written off plenty of people in my life around this. And it's bizarre. And yet it makes perfect sense given whiteness and given the lengths that we will go to preserve our position. I wish I had the answers. I don't.
Mhm.
Every
Yeah.
day I'm just more and more, I don't know what the word,
Shocked.
shocked,
Speechless.
perplexed. Not even I mean, I don't even, I associate
Okay,
shocked with
that's a
clutching
good
my
point.
pearls, and I'm not even shocked about that. It's just like, yeah,
Yeah.
I just don't, I don't, frustrated, just deeply disappointed, deeply. And people that don't look like me are saying to me every day, we go through this all the time. We're constantly disappointed by whiteness's oblivion. And I get that. I totally get that. I know that my disappointment and dismay is going to be a different place necessarily than yours might, or somebody who confronts this shit every day. I'm just now needing to confront it. And so I recognize that I'm late to the game with some of my sense of shock and dismay, but
And
I'm,
it's so funny because I'm gonna laugh every time I'm thinking about being curious around you, because there is this conversation about, the oblivion,
yeah,
and what I witnessed of the Republican response and Senator Britt was that there was intention and not so much oblivion, right? So there was like a clear knowing, a clear recognizing that, there's a larger migrant population. So then how do we develop this narrative that then feeds into the fear that we know that what's very successful about indigenous people when we were taking over the land of America, about Black Americans when they were granted their freedom. And so now we have a larger population of migrant people coming in. And so we know this blueprint works. So let's like now start to criminalize the next group of people.
right.
So that's intention. That's not so much oblivion.
Mm,
Whomever wrote that speech for Senator Britt, being able to really call into all of the social media memes and hashtags that they know were successful and had some real transformational expansion of consciousness, how to
mm,
pull that in and call it in for whiteness, that was not what I would consider oblivion at all. And then being able to like be really tactical and strategic about laying out an agenda and using so many theatrics and so much diction to be able to do that, and like I said, a very eloquent and clear and palatable way, was really Oscar worthy,
yeah.
if you ask me.
Agreed. Yes. I think the oblivion that I was speaking to was more about just the people that are kind of moving through space with these blinders on and not, but yes,
Mm,
the speech, the rebuttal, and any of the propaganda that's out there right now, that's, all of it's intentional. Yeah.
mhm.
That I agree with. I think I was thinking more about the white women especially, but white people in general that I know that are just moving through space and watching the Oscars. You brought up the Oscars. That's the oblivion that I was speaking
The
to.
oblivion.
Yeah, yeah.
Uh-huh.
That
Yeah.
that sense of
Suspended
deadness,
animation of disbelief
that
is
sense
what
of deadness, that soul.
yeah.
Yeah, Janan Matari, who's a Palestinian content creator, just did a podcast with Saira Rao, and she talked about a concept in her culture of soul loss. The description is basically people who have lost their souls and who are just moving through space with no real connect to the suffering of others. And it really resonated with me when she talked about it, because it was just this deadness inside that I see in the eyes of so many of the folks that I thought cared about the world and are now showing me they don't, certainly don't enough to make their lives uncomfortable.
Well, at least we do. Which is why we sit here and have these conversations and hopefully inspiring other people to be thinking about some of these things. I think folks should go and watch Senator Brent's response of their own accord.
I would be willing to bet the numbers are huge of the people that didn't watch it. And yet it was as you said, Oscar worthy performance.
Performance.
Yeah, I mean, and so well scripted and so well written, and all of it was so intentional. And I think too, there's such a idea that these types of events, this rebuttal, it's not harmful. Oh, it's just some senator from Alabama that nobody knows and probably nobody watched it, and big deal. She sat there in her kitchen, and oh, wasn't she just a Stepford wife, and write her off. I think what I'm learning is how important it is to pay attention to these moments. And that was an important moment. Just like when Trump said that debate, Proud Boys stand back and stand by, and we end up with January 6th. It's all of these things
Direct parallels.
people are saying and doing and calling in exactly what they want to have happen. It's not rocket science, and you don't have to really dig that deep below the surface to know what the narrative is and what they're trying to enact. And if you do still stand there in front of me and say, I don't know, I don't watch the news, I don't pay attention to these things, politics is just so nasty, I don't get involved, that is a choice. And that's the thing that I talk to people, especially other white people, about at this point, is that don't come at me and tell me that you don't know because you're not paying attention. It's everywhere. It's everywhere. And if
Yeah.
you're not watching and you're not paying attention, it's because you're choosing not to.
Yeah.
If you're choosing not to, then you need to ask yourself why, or maybe you don't.
Or maybe you don't. And then also having the conversations, right? Like
Yeah.
it's critical. Like I want to know the people around me are how they're thinking and what they're receiving, because then that also helps me to be able to identify like what I want to do to create my safety. So when I say, hey, I'm having this conversation with you, but I'm on non-US soil, I'm surrounded by what feels more safe to me,
Mhm.
then there's a reality of that comes from, and I'm privileged enough to be able to just hear something, be really annoyed by it, and be like, whoa, I need to get off of this continent right now because that was wild for me to experience and see and watch be allowed. And so yeah, that the impact of that and like having conversations about what that impact looks like for the communities that you're surrounded with, so that there is a robust conversation, because there also might be people who watch that and have and to your point are oblivious to what the impact could be specifically for the demographic that it was targeted for and for the people who are paying attention.
Well, just as we've said in other conversations, I'm recalling that you've expressed that you need to pay attention to these things in service to your safety. And what
100%.
comes up in my mind is that in service to whiteness safety is to not pay attention to these things. So it's the exact
Mm,
opposite. If I try to
mm,
engage another white person, especially one who I think doesn't believe the way I believe, or who might be on the fence or whatever, and
yeah,
engage them about that, their instinct to stay safe is to shut down and not have the conversation. And that's been my instinct in the past, and probably will be again at some point. And so For anyone who identifies as white who might be listening to this, we have to rise to that occasion and we have to engage people in those dialogues. And when we see them start to shut down, because we do see that, I can tell when their whiteness eyes start to glaze over, to say, I see you disconnecting, and I want to know, can we keep going? Even though you're feeling maybe uncomfortable, it seems to me like you're feeling uncomfortable. Can we keep having this dialogue? Because that's the default, is to shut down and to shut it out.
Yeah, and I'm compassionate to people, especially because I feel that so present in my body, wanting to create safety for themselves, and then thinking realistically about what that means, right?
Mhm.
So creating safety for myself means, all right, I need to remove myself from this environment that is unsafe. But if creating safety looks different for somebody who is white identified with a white experience, and that is a reality about how they're going to respond, then that's the conversation that we need to be having
Mhm.
in regards to coming up with what safety could look like for a more expanded group of humans
Mhm.
than just white identified humans. Like,
Mhm.
what does that really, what comfort level, what does that really, really look like without always having to be inconsiderate of white comfort for the rest of us to be comfortable?
Right.
Eh,
Right.
So
That's the tough part about having these dialogues with other white people, is that is can I figure out the phrasing? Can I figure out a way to say, because what I want to say is, you do realize that the safety you think you're defending by shutting down is actually not safety. It's denial. You're not any safer. And I'm coming back to thinking about what she said in the rebuttal. She was painting this picture of these things that were supposed to be her current boogeyman, and yet she didn't actually talk about the things that are making her children less safe, that are making
mm,
her less safe in it out in the world. She conveniently left all of that out because that doesn't serve her narrative. That's what I find makes these conversations so difficult with people who are, who might identify as white and who have that white lived experience, is that often that shutdown happens out of I'm going to say, my qualifying qualification is a false sense of safety. It's an immediate sense of safety. It's, oh, I feel uncomfortable in my gut, so I'm going to, I don't want to talk about it. And it's like that, but that discomfort is not going to kill you. The gun will. It's just like, how do we get to talk
yeah.
about the thing that really is putting you at risk, instead of having you default to the thing you think is putting you at risk, and therefore makes you not open to activating for your own safety and the safety of others. It's one of the biggest challenges, I think.
Oh, I see your frustration. The
I I don't have the answers, and I don't have the,
yeah.
I wish I did. I wish I had the magic phrase that could open up that, or raise that gate off of that shutdown, and just say, can we just be human for a second? And because oftentimes when that happens, I'm talking to a person who doesn't even understand that that's a disconnect. They don't
Yeah.
understand that that's a denial. They don't understand. They literally think they're saving their own life by not talking about the thing that does nothing to save their life. It just, it's, I don't know if that's just the depth of the indoctrination, the depth of the training, the love, the deep love of privilege, the deep love of, it's
All
a
those, it's
combination of
white
all.
intersectionality. You're defining it for
Yeah,
us in this moment.
yeah.
Um, yeah. And well, at least we're talking about it. Maybe somebody else, some magician or somebody will come up with some theories and some answers to offer some support
Yeah. I
in
mean, I
this
just
moment.
think we have to keep, as white people, I have to keep trying. I have to keep
Yeah.
trying. I
We
have
all
to
have to keep trying.
keep having
Because
the,
I need to understand that it's also an issue of safety. The responsiveness and the response behavior is because of an issue of safety. And it's just a issue of safety different than what I'm used to because it's not life or
perceived,
death safety, it's the safety of like
perceived.
position and privilege.
Yeah.
Well, it's like this is what's comfortable for me and this is what I can survive in. And we're also talking about, let's contextualize this, a certain class of human
Yeah.
also, like with a socioeconomic status and a certain level of like privilege afforded to them, because folks who have less resources that are also dealing with what is more critical for survival,
You think.
what
I've
that looks
had
like. Well,
conversations
I
with
don't know
people.
because I'm saying it and then I'm starting to like talk like starting to hesitate in being confident about what I'm saying. And so to your point,
I've had dialogues with white people who have nothing, have barely anything to rub together, and yet they will go to the ends of the earth to deny the fact that they have privilege, to deny the fact that they have any voice or any ability to enact any kind of change. And I'm saying they because I do not identify as a person that comes from poverty. So I'm not distancing myself from that whiteness, but I want to acknowledge that I'm not a person who lives in a state of poverty. And so that goes way back to, well, at least I'm not black.
mhm, mhm,
So there's even another layer in there that makes it difficult for folks who wouldn't identify as a person of a class that has any level of safety in their life. They still won't,
acknowledge them.
yeah, and
Yeah.
own often. I'm not saying
Mhm.
everybody, certainly, but um,
Um, as I was having my reflections on the way that I experienced and perceived the Republican response, what were some of the responses that you had, the reactions that you had to, were you all of the aha moments that I had, did you have some of those same aha moments, or were there any that were brought up to you that were like, oh, I didn't think about that or see that?
the parallel of having the hard conversations being similar to what I've heard referred to as giving the talk to your children about how to survive interactions with police and things of that nature. I hadn't made that connection. And when you talked about your young person's reflection on, well, she's just being a Karen, that was interesting to me, the concept of the different generations and how they might perceive. And I'm curious actually from you, do you, because I think I was asking earlier, obviously that's a generational difference, but would you ascribe a descriptor to that as being ambiguous to the reality of how it can be harmful for a Karen to just be a Karen like that? Or do you have any kind of adjectives to, or was there any resonance in your gut when you heard her just saying, "Oh, that's just a Karen being a Karen"? How that landed on you, and whether or not you were like, "No, this is important. We need to pay attention to this," or I don't know. I
Yeah.
don't want to put words in your mouth.
Yeah.
I'm curious around that.
No, there wasn't words. And to clarify, her saying that that's a Karen being a Karen, I don't think that it was negating the impact of what she was saying. She
Okay,
was saying that this is typical of what white women are gonna do. So
gotcha.
we're used to this. Like you're having a reaction, mom, that's like, yeah, this
This
is
is what they
this
do.
is what we're used to they're doing.
Yeah.
Um, and this is what my generation will see that like that because we have a different ideology. We have a different way of framing it. And we're talking about a Black identified young female. So thinking about whom her colleagues are, though my young people have a diversity of friends,
Yeah.
um, but they don't American dream and sitting around tables for, dinner and having hard conversations is not their reality at all.
Yeah.
Their reality is their colleague friend group, the conversations that they're having, and seeing and watching on social media because that's the algorithm that they're building out.
Right.
That's who they're going to be focusing on. If that group of people have a responsiveness or a reaction to something, then there's going to have a different level of impact
Hmm.
than this Republican thing because they don't subscribe. They okay, thank you, Karen. And we're gonna call it out. We're gonna call you Karen. We're
Right.
gonna know that this is what you're talking about.
Mhm.
And okay, we're just not negating it. We are dismissing and devaluing you because we have a different sense of what American values are
Gotcha.
for that demographic of human. Now I know that there's a whole demographic of young people that don't live, in Miami in a a transient community of people that are a little bit more, have a little bit more tradition that
Yeah.
exists around them, that's or lack of cultural diversity. So I wonder what that looks like for the rest of Gen Z. I wonder what it looks like, and they're in college and DEI is coming out of, you know, being made available at their universities. And look, I'm still speaking on a level of privilege that doesn't speak to an entire demographic of humans that decide not to go to school because they can make money and do, and getting certificates and doing education in a different way. But if we're looking at education in a more foundational level in elementary and high school, and the folks coming out of that and what they're going to have access to be able to formulate ideas, I'm not sure if it's going to look the same as the way my young person is engaging, having watched the Republican response. There is no because I asked, I said, is this anything that anyone has made TikToks about or anything commentary on? And she had not seen that running through her algorithm. I'm concerned about who's having these conversations so that they can be able to call out and identify and speak to and respond to what it is that we're hearing, and what the impact of that is going to look like in our communities as we're moving forward, as we're thinking about what voting is, because those folks are of voting age, and the way that we're going to be able to protect democracy going forward if there is this very nationalized, white, privileged ideology and narrative that is being put forth and supported, whether or not it's being supported openly or not. But if that's the agenda that's being supported, then yes, somebody who's Gen Z with a different ideology is going to be stumped along the way with legislation. There's going to be a frustration, a rebellion, and I don't know what that looks like. History has told us what it looks like, but with the different iteration of AI and technology and
Yeah, we don't know how
shifts, and
we don't know
we don't
exactly
know what
how it's
that
gonna
plays out with.
manifest. Yeah.
Yeah,
It
yeah,
just made me think of when you were talking about how young people approach the world differently with social media and the algorithms. I was thinking, our kitchen table is social media.
yeah.
That's where people are having dialogues. And I've pushed back on some of my silent folks around the genocide that's happening in Palestine, and saying, you're not doing anything, you're not speaking into it. And they said, well, we are. We're just not on social media doing it. And I'm like, well, the people in Palestine are asking us to be on social media doing it because that's how they get their voices
What
heard.
their need is, yeah.
So if you're talking which to me, I'm sorry, I'm just assuming, but if you're not doing it, on social media, then you're not doing it.
Uh-huh.
Let's just call it.
That's where it is.
I just I do not foresee these people sitting down and having difficult conversations with the people that surround them around it if they're not going to put it on social media, especially whiteness, because we love to amplify everything on social media, right? So anybody that tries to tell me that they're doing the work behind the
Mm-hmm.
scenes and they're just not doing it on social media, I call bullshit.
Mm-hmm.
But if you're listening to the voices of the people that are being directly impacted by this genocide, who are saying, begging us to keep talking about it in social media because that's where the pressure point is, then even if you are doing it outside of that platform, you're not doing it, you're not following what the people who are directly impacted are asking you to do. So yeah, so I have no idea how these next decades are going to manifest in terms of what engagement in the world looks like, and
Right.
how do you, I mean, I'm still blown away by the millions of people that are marching all over the world in support of Palestine. It just, every time I see one of those marches in places that we weren't seeing marches in before,
At all. Mm-hmm.
millions of people in the streets, and
Mm-hmm.
it's blowing my mind. So I hope we don't lose that.
Yeah. Yeah. I definitely think that things like, the State of the Union, the Republican response is us really centering kind of US imperialism, and those ideologies. And I am thankful for the next generations who are more globally connected so that they can have an expanded understanding of like the more global impacts that are occurring beyond us watching what's happening with America, but also being able to recognize that as an imperialistic nation, the way that we are, that we model, and people are in other countries are watching what it is that we do. So what side of where do we fall on the spectrum? There's not a side because that's too binary in thinking, but where do we fall on the spectrum of modeling in a way that's responsible and considerate and accountable to humanity as a whole, rather than just kind of what our needs are here. And hopefully positions of power shift because it is not the kitchen table anymore that exists.
And
Um,
that doesn't mean
so
that anything other than the kitchen table is wrong or
it's
broken
wrong. Yeah,
or less than or
yeah,
any of
yeah,
those things, you know.
absolutely. And the kitchen table is good for when you do have an opportunity to sit around and have a meal together and actually talk about the
Right.
things that,
But the
are
kitchen
impacting
table
your
can also
lives.
be
But
isolating. The kid,
it can
if
be
that's the
all the
only place
things
you eat, and those are the only conversations you have with the same people over and
very
over and
insular.
over again, that's how we end up where we are. My compulsion is to say, and not forgetting the importance of a speech like that rebuttal and the violence that it calls into being, because how many times have people said to me, oh, well, when the old people die, it'll shift. When the old people die, it'll shift. If that was true, this would have happened a long time ago. Those old people are indoctrinating their young people before they leave this realm. And so that's how that indoctrination keeps perpetuating itself. So not only do we need to look to the young people and the hope that the internet and a broader understanding of the world brings to their understanding, we also need to remember that there are still those tiny kitchen tables
Hmm.
where that indoctrination is still
It's
happening.
happening. Yeah.
And, so in that respect, yeah,
But the kitchen table is being expanded into the classroom with
right,
legislation. So
right,
that's the thing that's very, very, very scary and very
very,
telling
yeah,
about where's power and where agenda lies,
yeah,
right? So
yeah,
it's not just our kitchen table. And because we do have other sources of being able to communicate amongst each other through social media and the internet, but all of us having to do our due diligence in having conversations, fact checking information and having these connections with the people that the narratives are being built around as the boogeyman, right? Now
mm,
we can look to the future of our young people
yeah.
that have a more expanded connection, diversity of connections. I think that's what we've come to conclude. Um, to be able to move in different ways than what we do. How you feel? How you feel?
Did we solve anything?
No.
Why do I give a fuck? Why do
Thanks for
I
joining
give a
us.
fuck?
Until next time,
Why
as you
do I
move
try
throughout
so
your day,
hard?
continue to ask yourself,
Why do I give a fuck?
Why Do I Give a Fuck is produced in collaboration with Johanna and Deanne. Music by Norwegian musician Water. See you next time.